Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our panel. The Women PM group at Google is actually the largest product management community-based group. And so each year we collectively look forward to the Women in Product Conference as a way to reconnect with this powerful community, as a way to learn from each other, and as a way to grow our relationships with each other across the industry. So my name is Erin Teague. I am Director of Product Management at YouTube. I lead YouTube sports, film, and TV show product teams, as well as our racial justice, equity, and product inclusion team. And I have the honor of serving as today's panel moderator. By way of introduction, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. I studied computer science and computer engineering at the University of Michigan, worked as a software engineer for a couple years, and then went to business school as a way to transition into product. I got my MBA from Harvard Business School and made my way out to Silicon Valley shortly thereafter. So I was relatively early at Twitter, a couple years there. Then I went to a startup, which was a bit of a disaster, and then made my way over to Yahoo, where I led fantasy sports. And I've now been at Google for almost 6 years, and my entire Google experience has been at YouTube. So that's a little bit about me. I will now turn it over to our amazing panel. And Sabrina, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Erin. Hi there, I'm Sabrina Ellis, and I'm very excited to be here. I actually spoke at the inaugural Women in Product event, and so I feel like I'm kind of coming home now. So very excited to be here. My current role is that I'm the VP of Product Management and UX for Android and Pixel software, and then also run the kids and family effort at Google. So let's see, my experience. I started out studying computer science as well, and then was a software developer for a couple of years, as well as consulting, and then I went back to business school. So both my undergrad and business school were at Stanford. I had to go back after a couple of years on the East Coast, back to the warmth. And then after that, I worked combination startups. I too was at Yahoo, actually, for a number of years, where I ran Yahoo Mail and the real-time communications. Went to another startup after taking a break. We can talk about that at some point. Taking a break is a good thing in your career. And then I've been at Google now for over 11 years. And so it's been an adventure.
That's awesome. 11 years. I bet it's flown by.
It has. It goes by faster than you think.
That's awesome. Thank you, Sabrina. Sanaz, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you both. Hi, everyone. I'm Sanaz. Super excited to be here today. I am currently the VP and GM for Android and Business Communications, which is our messaging, calling, and business communications products. I have been at Google for 10 and a half years now. And it's been an exciting journey. I started 6 years in ads. And the past 4.5 years, I've worked mostly in communications, mostly the products I currently run, but I've also overseen Google Meet, Google Duo, Gmail, and Calendar. Prior to that, I was at Microsoft for 7 years, just over 7. And over there, I worked on a bunch of 0 to 1 products, which was really fun. I launched Bing and MSN Music and live.com and start.com, and it was really fun. I studied computer science at University of Victoria. I actually wanted to be an attorney, and my dad convinced me to take a computer science course in first year. I'm really happy he convinced me to do so. He kept telling me this is the future, and I think he was right. I ended up really liking the classes that I took, and I interned as an engineer, but then one of my internships was actually as a product manager at Microsoft, and I really enjoyed it and have enjoyed the path ever since.
Amazing. Thank goodness for dad, huh? That's awesome. Great. Sophia, over to you. Last but not least.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia Lin. I am the GM for the food vertical experiences here at Google. So that's anytime you do a dining experience on search or maps, that's my team. I've been at Google now for, I think, the longest actually out of this room, which I wasn't expecting. I am a Google baby. I came straight out of school into Google. I've been at Google now for 14 years. What did not actually major in tech. I was pre-med at Stanford. And somehow, as I was thinking about whether to apply to med school, applied to Google to see what tech was like, and it snowballed. And here I still am because I love it so much. But I've started more in, I would call the underbelly of the internet, working on quality systems for search and ads. And I worked on mapping digital or creating digital maps for new countries. And then more recently on consumer experiences with dining, things to do, things like that.
That's great. One thing that I didn't realize before this panel is that you all three have been at Google for at least a decade. That is incredible. That's meaningful. And it's another reason why I'm so incredibly excited to be having this conversation with you three today, because you're experienced leaders who happen to be women, and you all have gone through all of the ups and downs that is Google, and have survived and thrived. So this is an incredible opportunity to speak with you each, and I'm excited. I want to start by doing sort of what we usually do at Google, which is to start with rapid fire questions, and I'll kind of pick who to answer what. So, Sanaz, what is the last movie or concert you went to pre-pandemic?
That is a great question. I actually just went to my first post-pandemic concert, which is Coldplay. And what's hilarious is Coldplay was also my last concert pre-pandemic. So you can say I'm a big Coldplay fan.
Consistency, I love it. Sophia, what is a new hobby you've picked up that brings you joy?
Oh man, this is kind of embarrassing because it's super dorky. So COVID meant I was outside a lot. So I got really into identifying birds and bird watching. So there's the Audubon app, which is amazing. It helps you identify birds really quickly. And my brother calls it the grown-up version of catching Pokemon that's socially acceptable. So that's what I've gotten into.
Real life Pokemon. I love it. Sabrina, next event or game lined up?
I have a family wedding that I will be attending. One of my cousins is getting married, and you got to know my family. I have like a gazillion cousins. I mean, I have 3 cousins and a nephew that all work at Google. We're kind of everywhere. So exciting. My cousin had to postpone his wedding for 2 years, but we're finally all getting together.
Wow, you have 3 cousins and a nephew? That is amazing. It's a family affair. That is a family affair. Okay. Where do you want to travel next and why? And I will ask both Sophia and Sanaz.
I can take a first pass. I think where I'd want to travel next is probably Iceland. So pre-COVID, I promised my dad I'd take him there, and he used to take me traveling all the time when I was little. So I like made him that promise pre-COVID. Pandemic hit, and I still owe it to him. So that'll be the first trip I think I probably take when things open up a bit more.
That's awesome. What about you, Sanaz?
We are overdue for Disneyland. I have 2 little ones. So that's going to be the kid trip. It was actually supposed to happen last week. It's a little bit delayed. I got COVID last week, so we delayed the trip. But so Disneyland is coming up. And the other trip that we're super excited about is we're looking at Belize. My husband is looking to become a certified diver. I am terrified of diving, so I will just accompany him while he becomes certified.
That's amazing, and thank you for joining us despite having COVID so recently. It's truly an honor to have you here. Last question for you, Sabrina. If you could pick your intro song, what would it be and why?
Okay, this was hard. We were talking about this recently, and it became a family affair. We may or may not have dialed in my daughter from college so we could all mock me, really, in what song it should be. In the end, after many ones that I rejected that they came up with, we decided on Greatest Showman, This Is Me. Because I just think that it's like bringing your whole self to work, way more fun. So it's kind of the way I am.
I love it. Do you want to sing a few bars for us briefly?
Aware of how bad of a singer I am. I like to say I mouth the words during Happy Birthday so I don't ruin the event.
That is amazing. That is amazing. And I appreciate your level of self-awareness. Key aspect of being a great leader, actually. Okay, so I want to now switch us over into a couple of deeper questions. For each of us, there's often one thing that's a guiding star from a values perspective that really speaks to how we lead. And in some ways, it almost becomes our brand. So, for example, if you ask my team, they would tell you that Erin leads with conviction and passion that is contagious, and it shows up in spades. And so, if you think about this past 2 years specifically, what have you discovered is a core value that fuels you? And how does this shape you as you lead as a PM? And this question is for you, Sabrina.
Look, I think there's a couple of things. I think that I do tend to be quite optimistic. Like a lot of what my team does is we work so much across Google. And often there is this, oh my gosh, that's hard. How are we ever going to do that? And I think I'm just like, we can do it. I think we can. If we're just determined. And I think paired with that, I always tell my team, it's all about fun. Are we having fun? Because we will not build great products if we are not having fun. So I get the feedback sometimes that they're like, wow, that's weird. I've never heard that from an exec. It may sound trite, but I mean it in reality. And my team will all say that. Are we having fun? I will always ask, and that's something we need to prioritize.
So, Sabrina, has your team ever said no to that question? And if so, how did you pivot?
Well, look, that's a lot of it. I will say sometimes I will hide, back to the self-awareness. I'm like, are we having fun? I don't think this is fun. What is wrong, people? And what do we need to do to fix it? And so I think it's more that. It's not that we're always, it's a matter of if we aren't, then something's likely wrong. And so we need to prioritize and we need to figure out what it is.
That's great. I love that. I love that. I love that. Are you having fun? I'm gonna steal that. I want to shift a little bit to Sanaz, and let's talk about the products that you represent. How do your products enable its users to restore and rediscover?
That's a great question. So the past couple of years have obviously been pretty unprecedented, and I had the honor of leading all of our communication products at the time. So I was leading Google Meet, Google Duo, Gmail Calendar, as well as messages and calling. And I'll just give a couple of examples around these products. I'll never forget, the heat of the pandemic is like March or something. We're all like, let's work from home, kids are home, homeschool, like, let's, basically cut off, any human contact because we're all going to die kind of feeling. And then at the same time, the reality is the products were under a lot of demand. And so when you look at our video products at the time, there was so much that we needed to do. And there were a lot of simple things that ended up having huge impact that I actually think are just making us really better in terms of just being more connected and feeling that way, especially when we couldn't physically be together. Some simple examples is one of the very first things we did was letting you have multiple tiles of people while you're video conferencing. And it's so small, it's so impactful, so that as you're having a meeting with 40 plus people, you can still see everyone's faces and feel a connection with them. Or as you're now connecting with family or friends and having virtual game nights or whatever, being able to still see everyone's faces. And remember, back around March, it was like the boom of like virtual happy hours and virtual birthday parties and all kinds of events. And so like literally just being able to see people's faces, is the next best thing to being together in person. And that was one angle that was hugely impactful. But then there was also a lot of other things that we invested in that I think are just better ways of equality and equity. So for example, I don't know, I felt like pre-pandemic, it was always like, how do you interject in a meeting? Because spoken words were the way to voice your opinion and be heard. Now we have completely new ways of being heard. I love hand raise. I just love how it's been organically adopted. Now it's actually rude if you speak without raising your hand. So whenever I speak without raising my hand, I feel like doubly bad about it, because I'm like, oh my God, I helped build this feature and I didn't use it. Like, this is terrible. But those are some of the things that I love, is hand raise or being able to chat during the meeting. These are all ways of enabling more equitable participation that are far more inclusive than, hey, are you loud enough to interject, for people to know that you have something to say. And so that's something I'm excited about, especially as we now embrace this whole new norm of hybrid, where some of us at work and some of us at home. We still are going to keep that etiquette. I don't think it's going to be a situation where we're going to like rewind 2.5 years to how we used to do things before these features existed. So that's one example where I think we've really, like, participation equity, representation equity has a whole different meaning in terms of how we literally work together, which is really, really amazing. And I think it's going to have a very long-standing impact. Another area that I'm really proud of the team's work, is an area actually that we work closely with Sabrina on, is around calling. And we've invested a lot in making calling more helpful, because not all calls are great. And there's a lot of unwanted calls. I personally try to like avoid calls as much as possible, only when necessary. And we've had a lot of investments around things like call screen, where you can have the Google Assistant help you know who is calling, so that you can pick up the calls that are really important for your time. Or when you're calling a business, being able to see what is the menu of options. I always like get there's like 8 options and you don't remember which option to call. These are all ways of how technology can help, not get in the way, but help with more meaningful connections. And so that's another area that a lot of these innovations have been more recent, where again, it's a very common medium of communication. And those are great examples of how we've tried to be more helpful, to give people back a lot more time, which is the most precious resource we all have.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I mean, if you could also figure out how to give me a couple more hours every day, that would be amazing, while you're figuring out how to give back time. But I love the first example. It's amazing to just think about how meeting dynamics shift when everyone now has the same size tile on the screen, and everyone now has to follow the same etiquette. And I'm as we're getting back into this hybrid and going back into the office, I'm noticing things that I never even noticed before, which are like who sits at the head of the table and the different power dynamics. And so I do love those examples, and the raised hand has been such a key component in terms of having equitable meetings. So thank you. Those are both phenomenal examples. I want to go personal for a second, and this question is for both Sophia and Sabrina. And I want to talk about your path to PM. So, what is a unique aha moment that you've had in your career journey that has greatly influenced how you show up as a PM? And Sophia, let's start with you, and then over to Sabrina.
Oh man, this really is a personal question. I think the one I would go to is early in my career. There was a period of time I was leading a team through like a really visible external launch, lots of scrutiny from leadership, and also expected lots of PR following the launch. And there was a certain amount of leadership dysfunction that was actually happening all around the launch, all throughout the different parts of the company. And I thought the best thing I could do as a leader at the time was to shield my team from it and just pretend the dysfunction didn't exist and act like everything was super okay and going as plans. And what I discovered later was that totally eroded the team's belief in me and my credibility to really just call it like I see it. And so that was a big turning point for me in how I showed up as a leader, of really embracing as one of my core values authenticity, and letting the team know when things weren't okay, when things were happening that were not fair or didn't make sense, but continue to also be an anchor for the team. So that was probably one of the moments in my journey that really shaped how I changed my leadership style. Sabrina, I'm curious for yours.
You know what? I will share a total and complete failure. So, because I think maybe you learn the most from those. So this is actually when I was running a product for Yahoo Mail. And this is in the days before Gmail actually. And Yahoo Mail, we were kind of trucking along to get to be the biggest in the world. And then Gmail came along and launched. And it was we've got to completely change our storage model. We have got to do all kinds of big new UI changes and get it all live. And there was all kinds of pressure from the PR team, the marketing team, the executive team. You got to make this huge, you got to make it big. And so there was this pressure to launch globally all at once on a Monday morning. Okay, so what happened? That was a bad decision. Okay, there was a lot going on, and we actually know by email habits from long ago the highest peak traffic time, Monday morning. People are getting into work and they're all just catching up on things. So we not only took down Yahoo Mail, at that point we had so many things that have been cached on the server. We took down Akamai. It was a glorious, spectacular failure. I kind of took down the internet. And so I think, look, this is a big lesson for me. One, life goes on. Okay. Two, executives that are so busy that they can't meet with you, all of a sudden when you completely fail, are all free to meet with you at noon and ask what exactly happened. That was magical. And three, there's have confidence in yourself. Don't be so influenced by others and their asks that you feel like as a product leader, you have to meet everything that they're asking for. Your job, your role is to take all those pressures into consideration and figure out is the right strategic path forward for the team. And so there's a little bit of have more confidence in yourself too, but yeah, it was a tough way that I learned, and there may have been some global pain on that one, but I learned.
I love that. And it's so funny, when we think about mistakes, we're often ashamed of the mistakes that we've made throughout our careers. And so, but I'm sort of shifting to understand that like the mistakes are really where I've grown the most. The areas of discomfort that cause self-reflection are really how I've grown the most. And so one thing that I do think is hard though, as it relates to mistakes, and specifically to the point that you just mentioned, Sabrina, about having confidence in yourself. How did you regain that confidence? How did you recover from the mistake?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, in some ways, in the firefighting moment, you recognize you need to step up. And the fact is, you have a whole team that is looking to you. How are we going to solve this now? So you're almost not thinking, the adrenaline is kind of taking you through there. It's almost after when people are asking, hey, what happened? Why is it? And you question yourself, am I the right leader here? I think that's where you have to have your support network, right? You have to have your peers, hopefully a community that you're working together. For me, my also personal support network is my husband, right? I mean, we in some ways, we went to Stanford Business School together. I always say any job that hires me, they kind of get a twofer because he's probably the best strategic mind that I've ever worked with. And I go through everything with him, and he helps me see things in a way that I think is more objective and helps me actually build that confidence.
I love that. I love that. And sticking with that theme, the next question is for you, Sanaz. One of the products that I'm responsible for is YouTube Sports, and I've been a sports fan my entire life. And so as a kid, I always gravitated towards playing team sports as opposed to individual sports. And it just sort of naturally happened. But over time, I realized that there really is something special about working together with other people towards a common goal. The old adage, teamwork makes the dream work. And so throughout the course of my career as a PM, I can't attribute my success or accomplishment solely to, my individual work ethic or outcome. It's been a lot of help. I've gotten a ton of help from sponsors, mentors, and community. And obviously, like for me, it's a Black PM community at Google. It's the women PM community both at Google and throughout the industry. And so, Sanaz, who has helped you when you think about kind of leading with gratitude? Who from your crew, your community, would you like to thank for making your success possible?
Oh gosh. It's a long list, I will say. I think one thing I feel fortunate about is I feel like throughout my career, I've been really lucky where I feel like I've had some sponsors along the way. And I think the thing with sponsorships is it kind of really happens organically. It hasn't, it's always been something where I don't feel like I've asked for it. I've kind of like stumbled on it. And I feel really lucky about that. And I feel like throughout my different roles, I've been lucky enough to have sponsors both at Microsoft and Google throughout the years that have really helped me out. And usually the sponsors, it helps out when your sponsor is more senior and is someone that can advocate for you, especially when you're not in the room. And so that's something that I feel super grateful about. And you just someone that you feel like has your back. I would say in the past few years on my journey around the communication products with Google, I probably thank two people the most. It'll be Jamie Rosenberg and actually Hiroshi Lockheimer. I feel like they've appreciated the journey that our products have been on. They've appreciated the difficulty. And most importantly, they've always been there with the right sets of nudges in terms of the things that we needed to do the most. And yeah, for that, I'm really grateful. I feel like they were there to like have my back, but at the same time, they were both really effective at, in a very subtle way, pointing out all the things that I needed to do. And that is really an art, I have to say. I feel like they're both extremely good at the slight nudges of, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And that's, I think, something I really aspire to, the art of giving feedback in a way that can be so well delivered. Like them is something that I would love to master over time. But yeah, that's something I just feel really lucky about is having these organic kind of sponsors, mentors that you feel like you can build the relationships with over time.
Critical. I think all of us can say that we wouldn't be where we are today without a healthy group of mentors and sponsors. And one question I often get, which will be a follow-up for you, Sanaz, is really about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. So you mentioned that sponsors are folks who can advocate for you when you're not in the room. It sort of happens organically. Sometimes you may or may not even know who they are. And then mentors are people who you kind of show everything, the good, bad, ugly, and they just kind of help you through your journey. Can you talk a little bit about how you've thought about the difference between the two within your career? And I'm very curious because the two people, for folks who are not at Google, the two people that Sanaz mentioned are very senior. And so for, many folks in our audience are sort of at the middle stage of their career, they have a few years of work experience under their belt. At that stage, how do you put yourself in a position to be discovered by such senior leaders so that they feel comfortable sponsoring you?
That's a great question. When I look back earlier in my career, what I have noticed is, going back to kind of the sponsorship model is both when I was early in my career at Microsoft, as well as earlier in Google when I wasn't as senior. One thing I feel lucky about, and I do think this can probably be generally applied, is I feel like it doesn't take a lot of interactions for more senior folks to actually take note of top talent and people with potential. I do feel like great leaders are keenly aware that honestly, the most important thing that we do is the people. Like the talent is number one. Every leader knows that. And I think if every leader does not think about how do I grow talent and foster talent and identify talent and lift up talent, that's probably not a great leader. And so that's something I feel like I have just been lucky about, is that I feel like I've been able to have not a lot of opportunities, but the opportunities that have been high stakes, being able to show up at those moments is really, really critical, because end of the day, you don't need a lot of interactions, I think, with senior leaders to leave the mark, because I think leaders are so used to seeing, they're keenly aware of people, keenly aware of talent. They always want to lift people up. I think most great leaders want to do that. It's really, really important to show up in those interactions the right way. The other thing is that the reality is your interactions with your day-to-day teams are actually the most important, because what has the most value is what everyone thinks about you, and that's something we all control in our everyday. Your brand and your reputation that you build is a culmination of how you show up to work with the people that you work with every day. And that is so powerful, because that's just something that builds up organically, and you want to leave a mark, a positive mark, with everyone that you work with, because that's ultimately your reputation that will make its way. That those are kind of the combination of things that really help. And so that's always been my kind of approach with this, is, kind of do great work and it will be recognized. I've grown up with that as a very strong kind of ethos of having that perspective in life. I know it's not always like that, but I think it helps to think that it is. And I feel like it has served me well. And so what you focus on the most is just doing really great work and showing up at all the right moments, and just trust that you have great leaders in place that will recognize the great work and the great talent.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's funny. We often think about sort of the big product review is that moment that defines our career, but the reality is oftentimes it really is the day to day and the experience that people have with us on a day to day basis that really does matter. But at the same time, in that big product review, it's a moment that matters, and we better deliver. So I love that. I love that it's really the combination of the two. So switching a bit, people often mistakenly equate culture to perks. And this is something that people think about Google all the time in particular. And so this question is for you, Sophia, since you've been at Google the longest. When I think of culture at Google, I think it's one of the things that we're creating for our PMs and our product leaders as is really the secret sauce that influences how we work and what we work on. And so for me, culture is really the intersection of values, people, and actions. And it's the thing that makes working here so great and makes working with all of you so great. And so for each of us, there is something that we hold close that most don't know that makes it special to us to work at Google and specifically as a PM here. Can you talk about the culture of your group, since you've worked in a variety of different areas as well, as a PM, and how that has influenced you as a leader?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the one thing that's been consistent, agnostic of any team I've worked on at Google, is that real hunger and that passion to really do something that helps people. I think that anchors every single team I've ever been on at Google. And I think this can show up in a variety of ways, of whether it's thinking through like, what does advertising enable ultimately for that advertising for the people that it's reaching? It can be thinking about small restaurants and what they're trying to accomplish in the world. But ultimately, how that's colored a lot of my leadership style has been to really go back and anchor the teams back on like, what are we really trying to do for people? There's the business strategy that we're following and what we're trying to do for the company. But the thing that really gets people excited is what are we trying to do to change people's lives and make the world a better place, in addition to everything else we're trying to accomplish as well.
Yeah, that's great. Well said. So this next question is really about how we work, and this is for all of us, everyone on the panel. Not me, but you three. So from product launches to our career journeys to failures, we all have had these critical, pivotal moments. And, we can look back at them and think about how they shaped who we are today. And so, as Sabrina mentioned earlier, sometimes they're a mistake, but sometimes there's just a critical pivot where you've changed directions, and you initially were going one way and you changed direction. I'm curious to hear from each of you about a critical pivot and how that has enabled your progress. And I'd love to start with Sabrina, then Sanaz, and then Sophia.
Thanks, Erin. It's interesting. I already talked a little bit about moments that have changed my career and how I think about it. I'll actually draw on a different example that's from a product side. I'll take the camera that we have actually on phones as an example. It was a learning for us. I think before, when we had cameras on Android and our team was building up camera, we were trying to say, how do we influence this? How do we take this technology to the next level? And this is several years ago. This is pre-Pixel. This is probably 7-8 years ago. We said, well, how can we help all of the OEMs in Android really push this forward? And remember, think back. Now, this is hard for us to remember because now smartphone photography is just in a whole different realm. But we kind of saw the potential for that, but we couldn't quite figure out how to get there. The way back then, you were still carrying like a different camera and your phone because it was way better in a camera. And now that's changed. The thing that we actually learned, we actually put together an app, we put it in the Play Store, we had tried to actually get and we could never get the experience quite where we needed. And what we recognized finally was, because you can't do it at this layer. You can't push forward the technology unless you really actually go deeper and really own a full technology stack. And so with that, we actually told the team, instead of saying, all right, how can I affect the potentially billions of users on Android? How can I actually really make something amazing by focusing? And so that team, even before we actually did Pixel, they started with the Nexus program. They said, all right, we're going to focus on the one device where we can control the hardware, the whole layer, so we can build a different type of experience. And that fundamentally changed what we could do with the technology. And if you look at it, I do think with Pixel, the first one, we changed the expectation of smartphone photography. And then you take a few years later, and we're like, all right, well, I want to be able to take a picture in the dark, whatever. And so we pushed that forward. Now what's happened was the way that we did, I think we've affected all smartphone photography, right? Because it was like our kind of fellow OEMs in Android, but also, on Apple side, they all invested in it. The expectations that we all have for the pictures that we can take on our cameras on our smartphone cameras is completely different. And so I think there was a recognition of just trying to approach products in a different way. Sometimes you're going after the big audience all at once, but maybe actually you can influence them more by showing them what can be done. Because if you do something great, I just think everyone else is going to say, I want that too. I'm going to figure out how to do that too. So that was actually a pretty pivotal change for us to actually just really focus change. And I think we drove a bigger result because of it.
Yeah, 100%. That's great. That's great. And I love that you use an example purely within the work of making a pivot, because we often think that building product roadmaps are just sort of this straight linear experience, but the pivots are sometimes where the biggest and best insights happen. Sanaz, what's your take?
That is a great question. Truth is, there are a lot of examples, but I'll share one. Roughly 4.5 years, I guess it's actually more than 4.5 years ago. September 2017. That's when I left ads. I had spent over 6 years in ads, and it was a lot of fun. But I was like, I'm ready for something new, and I don't want to be the ads person for life. And I decided, after many months of evaluating my options, I decided to take on Allo and Duo after talking to Nick Fox, who was running the team at the time, for many months. And I'll never forget, when I took this role on, I had so many of like my mentors and my husband, they were like, are you crazy? Like, do you really want to work on Google's messaging products? Like, what is wrong with you? And here's a random fun fact about me. Like, I just love working on things that are kind of like this underdog mentality. Like, I felt that way when I worked on search at Microsoft. Even when I worked on ads at Google, I was working on brand measurement, which we had never succeeded at. It didn't exist. There were a lot of people that were like, "Are you crazy?" And so I took on Alando, and I was really excited. I have this motto, which is, in a beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, and in the experts, there are few. So I always try to have a really beginner mindset on something where I just get these really rosy view of the world. And so I was excited. I hadn't done consumer for 6 years, so I was really excited to, work on consumer products again. And like a month in, I was deeply in strategic analysis of the product, the areas of opportunity. And, I came to the conclusion, working with a few other key folks, that, we probably should not be investing in Allo. And it was a better investment for Google to actually just shift those resources to another product, which was messages, and it lived in a sister organization. And so basically, like a month into the job, I was like, I don't think I should be doing this job. And it was really amazing, because I wrote so many papers, and I had to convince a whole set of VPs that we needed to do that, and everyone agreed. And I also realized, like, I was probably like working myself out of the job that I had just taken on. But it ended up being like amazing and fulfilling. I learned so much in terms of, how do you that was a hard pivot. It was a team that, and the hardest part wasn't necessarily the strategic decision. It was actually the team part that I realized was so hard. I had never pivoted a team. My VP at the time, he was in Sydney, Australia, and he asked me to just drive the reorg. I was like, I've never done this. But that ended up being an amazing experience. And, I made so many mistakes because I'd never done it, in terms of like, how do you bring the team along, and how do you make sure you excite them about a new mission? How do you retain the talent as much as possible? All of that was just an amazing, invaluable experience. But that was probably the biggest pivot. It was a shutdown of a product where people had put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it. And leading through that was a great learning experience for me. I do think it was absolutely the right thing to do for Google. I've made it my life's mission to simplify our story in this space, and so I felt good about like one step towards simplification. But yeah, that was probably the biggest pivot I did.
That's a good one. And I like that it was something that you had never done before. How transparent were you with your team about the fact that you had done something like this before? Or like, how transparent were you in the process as you were making mistakes? Because that's probably inevitable given that you hadn't been in that position before.
I'll be honest. One of the main reasons I took the role was, up until that point of my career, I had literally just been a founding product manager my whole career. Like every product I worked on, I was like PM0. So this was the first time I had ever joined a team that existed. So it was totally new to me. I'm pretty transparent, so I was pretty transparent with everyone that worked closely with me. So I'm a big fan of like, just, I feel like truth is always, and honesty is always the best way to operate. But what I did learn was, it was a huge learning experience for me, because I could only interact directly with so many people. And so there's a lot of people that I couldn't personally reach. And that was probably the biggest learnings that I had through that process is, I handled it well, whereby with all the folks that I could bring along with the decision making. But, the ripple effect was a few hundred people that I didn't spend time with. And those were things that I learned the hard way, in terms of not everybody was brought along. That was a great lesson for me. We were able to correct for it, but I had to get a lot of rude awakenings to be able to to correct for it.
Yeah, this is a great example. Sophia, over to you, and then I'm going to ask one final question because I think we have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, I'll keep mine short also because I had a product one and a product shutdown one, and Sabrina and Sanaz so eloquently already told those. So I'll pick a different one. I'll talk a little bit more about my own career journey then, in terms of one of my biggest pivots in my career was deciding to move from being a back-end infrastructure quality platform PM to a consumer PM. And I remember at the time I had so many people who were saying, why would you do that? Your trajectory is so steep. You're so well known in this product area. This is not a good idea. And I just wanted to try consumer. And so I changed everything. I know the advice is always pivot on something that you know. I completely pivoted everything all at once. And it was such a wonderful experience. I was incredibly humbled when I first did it because I was bad at everything at the get-go. And I think what I learned was exactly, I think, Erin, what you talked about and what Sabrina, you talked about earlier, is like life goes on, you keep learning, you keep going. And I got better at it. And now I'm so happy I made the change because I think it was one of the best decisions I made, and it opened up opportunities for me in ways that I couldn't have imagined. But I did have to go through that pain, and I think as PMs, you always think about horizontal moves like, oh gosh, that's going to be so painful. What if I can't do it? But it was a wonderful experience, and I would totally do it again.
That's great. And I love the example of just really pushing yourself to be uncomfortable and be bad, for some period of time. Okay, so last question that really ties together the theme of restoring and rediscovering. I would love to hear what that means to you. And I'm kind of tying two things into one question. What do you want this group to leave with? What is one thing that you want to share with the group to really encourage them to take forward with them from this session? So maybe we start with you. Go in the same order, Sabrina.
They're related for me. So it's good that you connected the questions, because I think, going back to my theme earlier of, having fun, a lot of this is we spend a lot of time at work. And maybe I take a step back. I think in this era right now, a lot of folks are taking stock of like, what's important to me in life and what is it that I want to be dedicating my time and energy to. I'd say the same thing with the number of hours that we spend at work, same thing there. Make sure that you as product leaders, you set the tone, and you can set the tone for your teams. So I encourage all of you, and this is something I'm doing as well, to make sure that you're in an environment that is positive, that you are having fun, that your team is having fun, because I think that's where we need to be spending our time now.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Sabrina says. I agree. I always say you gotta love what you do. Life's just too short, and you spend too much time working for you not to love what you do. I would say I think my biggest things that I'd like to leave folks with is around. It's a favorite quote I have from Nelson Mandela, actually, and it's something that I feel like I've always held it as something that guides me, which is, it always seems impossible until it's done. So that's something I'll leave you with, is if there's anything that you feel like it's just too big a goal, whether it's personally or product wise, it's not. Yeah, everything, end of the day, feels impossible until it's done. And as long as you believe that you can do this and take a step forward, that's what matters the most. So believe in yourself and know that not everything's impossible.
That's great. Believe in yourself. Sophia, wrap us up.
All right, I'll try. Mine is actually very similar to Sanaz's, which is stay curious and keep learning. I think that's what's kept me afloat all through COVID. Is the world is going to change around you. There's not much you can do except to ask questions, stay open, keep learning, and then, as Sabrina so eloquently put before, life goes on. You'll find a way.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, ladies. This session was incredible. I've taken notes. I couldn't help myself. I'm taking notes and jotting down insights and nuggets that you all have shared. So this has been phenomenal. Thank you for your vulnerability, for being willing to share, and thank you for your time. This has really been incredible.
Thank you, Erin. You were a wonderful host.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin. Thank you all.